For 45 years, the United States and the Soviet Union faced each other, preparing their militaries to engage in open combat. In the end, fortunately, that never happened, but this doesn't mean that fighting didn't take place. For almost the entirety of the period, a clandestine war was being fought in the shadows by means of espionage, covert actions, and other less than ethical means. I'm your host David, and today we are going to look at the role of one of the key figures in the American clandestine war, a seemingly innocuous chemist who earned the nickname Poisoner-in-Chief, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. This is the Cold War. Imagine a man who spent his days perfecting ways to slip poison into toothpaste, hide it in a fountain pen, or dust it onto a cigar. Imagine that same man ending his career on a goat farm, teaching disabled children how to speak, and volunteering at leper colonies. That man was Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA's in-house chemist, gadgeteer, and overall purveyor of things that sound like they belong in a James Bond movie, except that they were real. He has gone down in history as the Poisoner-in-Chief, the eccentric scientist who ran Project MKULTRA and developed assassination tools for the world's most powerful intelligence agency. Most people who have heard of Gottlieb know the broad strokes of MKUltra. CIA scientists giving LSD to unwitting civilians, sometimes in safe houses run by prostitutes, sometimes in psychiatric hospitals, sometimes in prisons. But that infamous project was only one slice of his work. To really understand Gottlieb's role in the Cold War, we need to widen the lens. He wasn't only interested in controlling minds, he was also the CIA's go-to man when it came to assassinating foreign leaders, or at least imagining bizarre ways of doing so. The story of Sidney Gottlieb is not just the story of LSD in the water supply, it's the story of Cold War paranoia weaponized through chemistry. Let's start at the beginning. Sidney Gottlieb was born in 1918 in the Bronx, the son of Hungarian Jewish immigrants. His childhood was marked by a stutter so severe that he often felt excluded from social circles, but he compensated with a sharp intellect and a knack for science. He earned a degree in chemistry, went on to complete a doctorate at the California Institute of Technology, and then took jobs in the federal bureaucracy, including the Food and Drug Administration. By the early 1950s, the CIA was a young agency facing a world that seemed to be spinning out of control. The Korean War was raging, Mao's China had recently triumphed, and Senator Joseph McCarthy was waving papers on the Senate floor claiming an ever-changing number of communists had infiltrated every American institution. The agency's leaders were convinced that the Soviets had discovered a way to brainwash people, and they were desperate to catch up. In 1951, Gottlieb was recruited into the CIA's Technical Services Staff, which was essentially the agency's Q branch. He was given a remarkably wide mandate. His new bosses, especially CIA Director Allen Dulles, wanted him to explore the frontiers of human control. Could chemicals or drugs force someone to confess secrets? Could hypnosis bend a person's will? Could poisons kill discreetly without leaving a trace? Gottlieb was enthusiastic about the possibilities. He saw the human mind as a machine that could be rewired, and the human body as a system that could be shut down with the right chemical key. He was in his early 30s, already brilliant, and now backed by the resources of the American government. It was in this context that he launched MKUltra. The project, which began in 1953, was the CIA's umbrella program for exploring mind control. The techniques included LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, electroshock, sensory deprivation, and hypnosis. Some of the experiments were conducted with willing volunteers, others were not. Prisoners at facilities like the Federal Penitentiary in Atlanta and psychiatric patients in hospitals became guinea pigs. One of the most notorious MKUltra subprojects was Operation Midnight Climax, where the CIA set up safe houses in San Francisco and New York, hired sex workers to lure men inside, and then secretly dosed them with LSD while Gottlieb's operatives observed from behind one-way mirrors. But MKUltra, as shocking as it was only part of Gottlieb's portfolio. The other part was assassination. CIA leadership, gripped by the fear that the Soviets were outmaneuvering them, began to consider killing foreign leaders as a legitimate tool of statecraft. Gottlieb was asked to provide the means. One of his first big assignments came in 1960, when the CIA turned its sights on to the Congo. Patrice Lumumba, the country's first democratically elected prime minister, had leaned towards accepting Soviet aid. That was enough to set alarm bells ringing in Washington, which feared that the Congo's vast mineral wealth could fall under Moscow's influence. President Eisenhower himself reportedly suggested that Lumumba should be eliminated. The task filtered down to Gottlieb. He was flown to the Congo carrying a kit full of poisons and instructions on how to administer them. One idea involved smearing a deadly toxin on Lumumba's toothbrush, another involved contaminating his food. In the end, Gottlieb never carried out the plot. Local rivals and Belgian officers murdered Lumumba in January 1961 before the CIA could act. But the episode reveals just how far Washington was willing to go and how central Gottlieb had become in these operations. While the Congo mission fizzled, the campaign against Fidel Castro became almost a running joke inside Langley. Following Castro's overthrow of Fulgencio Batista in 1959, and as he steered Cuba towards the Soviet camp, the United States treated him as an existential threat. Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon all wanted Castro gone. And time after time, Gottlieb's lab was asked to come up with ways to make that happen. The ideas ranged from the simply lethal to the downright absurd. One plan involved lacing Castro's cigars with poison. Another suggested filling one of his diving suits with a fungus that would cause a fatal skin disease, paired with a second plan to plant a seashell loaded with explosives in one of his favorite diving spots. The theory was that Castro, an avid diver, would pick up the shell and blow himself to pieces. Yet another scheme involved spraying chemicals in Castro's radio studio that would make his famous beard fall out or make him hallucinate while speaking, under the logic that a beardless hallucinating Fidel speaking to the nation would lose his revolutionary mystique. Not one of these plots worked. Castro survived them all and even mocked them publicly. At one point he quipped that if assassination attempts were an Olympic event, he would win gold. But behind the laughter was a serious truth. The CIA's top scientists were expending enormous effort on cartoonish plots that revealed the desperation of Cold War strategists. Gottlieb's role in these schemes cemented his reputation as the poisoner-in-chief. Gottlieb's work was not confined to headline-grabbing assassination plots either. His technical services staff churned out a steady stream of gadgets and chemicals for more everyday covert use. Agents received pills that could cause temporary paralysis, aerosols that could incapacitate groups, and devices disguised as pens or cameras that could deliver lethal toxins. He stocked the CIA's shelves with shellfish toxins, botulinum, and other exotic agents. At one point, the CIA maintained a stockpile of poisons so dangerous that when they were finally destroyed decades later, they required extraordinary precautions. The sheer imagination of Gottlieb's work is almost impressive, but it was rooted in a worldview that the Cold War justified anything. The CIA leadership believed that America was engaged in an existential struggle with the Soviet Union. If the Soviets might be developing brainwashing techniques, then America had to try the same, even if it meant dosing unsuspected civilians with hallucinogens. If killing a foreign leader could tilt the balance of the Cold War, then assassination was fair game. Gottlieb was the man who turned those abstract fears into tangible tools. Of course, the ethical and legal questions were enormous. MKUltra violated every standard of informed consent. Prisoners and patients were subjected to drug experiments without any knowledge of what was being done to them. Some never recovered. One Army scientist, Frank Olson, died after being dosed with LSD at a CIA retreat without his consent. Officially, his death was ruled a suicide, but decades of investigation suggest far more complicated circumstances. Assassination plots also ran directly counter to international law. None of this seemed to slow the CIA down in the 1950s and 60s, but the reckoning would come in the 1970s. When the Watergate scandal began unraveling American trust in government, journalists and congressional investigators turned over other stones. In 1975, the Senate's Church Committee began probing CIA's activities, and what they found shocked the public. MKUltra was exposed. The assassination plots were documented in detail. Americans learned that their government had seriously contemplated killing foreign leaders with poisoned cigars and exploding seashells. The Church Committee called it a, quote, gross violation of human rights. Gottlieb was summoned to testify. He admitted to many of the broad outlines, but claimed to remember few details. Conveniently, in 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms had ordered most MKUltra files destroyed, so much of the paper trail was gone. Gottlieb escaped prosecution. He retired quietly in 1972 before the investigations reached full steam. His career ended not with a scandal, but with a pension and a farm in rural Virginia. And it's here that the story takes its strangest turn. The man who had spent decades designing poisons and running mind control experiments reinvented himself as a kind of back-to-the-land mystic. He raised goats, grew vegetables, and practiced folk dancing. He and his wife traveled the world volunteering at leper colonies in India and working in rural hospitals. He studied speech therapy and helped disabled children. To neighbors, he appeared as a kindly, eccentric retiree who liked to farm and live simply. Few of them knew that he had once been the CIA's chief poisoner. Gottlieb died in 1999 at the age of 80. By then, the Cold War was officially over, and many of the details of his career were still classified. Only in the following decades, through declassified documents and investigative journalism, did the full picture emerge. Stephen Kinzer's biography, Poisoner in Chief, and the release of declassified Church Committee transcripts painted him as one of the most consequential and troubling figures in the CIA's history. So, how do we evaluate him? On one hand, Gottlieb was clearly brilliant. He had a knack for chemistry and a fertile imagination. On the other hand, his brilliance was deployed in the service of deeply unethical goals. He ran programs that experimented on unsuspecting people, some of whom were permanently damaged. He designed poisons for assassination plots that violated international law. And yet, he seemed to see himself as a kind of humanitarian in his later years, tending goats and helping the sick. The contradictions are striking. In many ways, Sidney Gottlieb represents the Cold War in microcosm. It was an era defined by fear that justified extremes. Leaders convinced themselves that survival required breaking rules. Scientists who might have spent their careers developing medicines or new technologies instead found themselves working on poisons and brainwashing. The paranoia of the time created an environment where a man like Gottlieb could thrive. Today, his legacy is a cautionary tale. MKUltra is remembered as a gross abuse of power that spurred reforms in how the United States conducts intelligence operations. Assassination plots against foreign leaders are now formally banned by executive order, though recent actions seem to have thrown this ban to the wind. Gottlieb's work reminds us of how easily fear can push institutions past ethical boundaries and how secrecy allows abuses to flourish unchecked. But it also raises unsettling questions. If so much of Gottlieb's work remained hidden for decades, what else is still in the shadows? How many files were destroyed before investigators could see them? How many other programs were launched in the name of national security that will never come to light? The very fact that we can laugh today at exploding seashells should not obscure the darker reality. Real people were harmed, lives were lost, and ethical lines were trampled. Sidney Gottlieb's story is not just about one man's eccentric career. It's about a government that convinced itself that anything was permissible in the name of winning the Cold War. Gottlieb happened to be the chemist who gave those fears a physical form. He was not the only one, but he is the most infamous. His poisons, his gadgets, his LSD experiments, and his assassination plots are all part of a larger tapestry of Cold War excess. So when we look back at the era of CIA dalliances with exploding cigars and CIA-paid prostitutes dosing unsuspected individuals with LSD, we should remember that behind the absurdity was a man who sincerely believed he was defending his country. Whether that makes him a patriot, a villain, or something in between is a question that still hangs in the air. What is certain is that Sidney Gottlieb left a mark on history, a reminder that science, secrecy, and fear are a volatile mix, and that sometimes the most dangerous men in the Cold War weren't the generals with armies, but the chemists with test tubes. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss our future work, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and have pressed the bell button, which is deep in conversation with a talking dragonfly that appeared in the corner after drinking from the brown cup. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is The Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, please remember that history is shades of gray and rarely black and white.